welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to what I think will be a very interesting discussion. So, today we're focusing on transitioning skills and we're looking at the role of education when it comes to a sustainable energy future. And I have the honor of being your moderator for today. My name is Samah Elsayed. I'm a program officer working on renewable energy education at IRENA. So, IRENA stands for the International Renewable Energy Agency. And I also manage a new project called the Energy Transition Education Network that was created as a collaborative platform to accelerate education and skill building for the energy transition. And today I'm joined by a very diverse panel. So we have representatives coming from industry, from education, philanthropy, and intergovernmental voices. And we're all here to discuss how we can build the knowledge, the skills, the values that we need for a renewable energy future. So let me welcome our speakers. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by Gauri Singh, who is the Deputy Director General of IRENA, of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Professor Izael de Silva, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation at Strathmore University in Kenya, and he's also a chairholder of the UNESCO Chair on Climate Change, Resilience and Sustainability. We're also joined by Professor Thwaites, who is the chair of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. He's also a chair of the Climate Work Centre and a chair of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We have the pleasure of being joined by Anna Robzar, who is the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Global Renewables Alliance. And finally, I'd like to welcome Adriana Alera, who is joining us from the Energy Innovation Team at the Bezos Earth Fund. So I think you can all agree that we have a fantastic panel and we'll have a very interesting discussion today. So welcome to you all. All right, so let's get right into the discussion. We know that the energy transition is going to transform the economy. It's going to create millions of new renewable energy and transition jobs. It's going to require the mainstream of green skills into existing occupations at the same time. But there's a growing concern that we're seeing that there are going to be skills shortages in the energy sector. And so we're not going to be able to achieve these very ambitious goals and plans that countries are putting forward. And so I'd like to turn to our speakers to discuss this topic. And Gauri, let me turn to you first. So IRENA, it's an intergovernmental organization. Its role is to support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future. So what are the priorities that governments are seeing when it comes to education and skill building for the transition? What are governments calling for?
Thanks, Samah, and it's a pleasure to be here speaking about, I think, a topic which is extremely critical for energy transition. I have heard it in so many places that talent is going to be at a premium as we move into a world where the pace for energy transition is going to accelerate. And just at this COP, in fact, we have seen more than 120 countries that have signed on to a global pledge for renewable for tripling renewables and also for doubling energy efficiency. Now that itself is a step change. It's not something that you would probably just be able to manage in a business as usual case, because if we look at where we are in the renewables deployment right now, we have about 3,400 gigawatts, and this is something that we've built as a world over so many years. And now in 7 years, we need to go from this 3,400 gigawatts to 11,000 gigawatts. So it's a big ask, but what does it really mean for countries and for segments and sectors? Clearly, we know that there will be many jobs which will get created in the clean energy technologies, but I think this is unfortunate that a lot of countries are still looking at or rather hoping that this is something that would happen automatically in their countries where young students and people who want to acquire skills will naturally gear towards. So I don't think this should be left to a market situation. It cannot be just waiting for the demand and supply situation to become really bad and then react. So a lot of proactive thinking needs to be done, a proactive planning needs to be done, and in that, because this is a sector which will see, a number of it's not just power sector, because it's now economy-wide transition that's happening. So you have the building space, which will need architects and many others in the energy efficiency to understand what it's all about. It's also in the transport sector. It's in the heating and cooling, and in R&D. So it's so many sectors that will open up just very quickly. And if the planning is not in place, if the policies that governments need to put in place for thinking ahead, if those are not in place, we all know there's a gestation period. So it's not as if you have a policy today and from the next year you will start getting people, or the persons you need. So it's going to be a long gestation that we need to take into account. And I have to say that right now, many of the countries are not looking at these possibilities in the way that they need to.
Thank you, Gauri. And it's true, it's becoming increasingly clear this transition. It's not just about technology, it's one that's about people as well, and we need to have people at the heart of it. So let me turn to you, Anna. You're joining us from the Global Renewables Alliance. And so for everyone here, the Renewables Alliance is really the voice of industry in the renewable energy sector. So what are you hearing from employers? What are some of the industry concerns that you're seeing when it comes to skills shortages for the energy transition?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. And I'd like to actually pick up from your important point about countries needing to plan for this as well. It's a dialogue. It's a joint effort. Now, there's many things that stand out at this COP, but one in particular is this campaign for tripling renewables by 2030. Now, we already have 125, might even be up if you check the board, just a few 100 meters from here. 125 countries have pledged to do that, to triple renewables by 2030. It deserves a round of applause because, yes, it's true, because that means those countries will need to start really thinking very hard and long about what comes next. And not too long, because we have 6 years. A lot needs to happen. All of that points towards two major vectors: the pace needs to go fast, and the scale. We need to go to 11,000 gigawatts. So much need to happen in this. We need to be seeing quite a revolution when it comes to the types of jobs this will bring about. So there are existing energy jobs. I think up to 60 million jobs on this world are dedicated to the energy sector. We're going to need to be seeing more jobs, and very different types of jobs as well, that are more geographically diverse than the current energy system that we have. So we need to take those things into account and plan accordingly. And when we look at the industry perspective, and I want to contextualize this, when I say Global Renewables Alliance, this is the umbrella of 6 different renewable energy industry associations: solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, green hydrogen, and storage. So we've got a pretty good view of what is required on the skills front, on the jobs front, across the board, across the spectrum, to get to those 11,000 gigawatts. And I can give a couple of examples maybe later on how we're trying to work on that, because we want to be part of the solution, obviously. But we're going to need to be seeing a lot of skill gaps being plugged, especially in the STEM sectors, catered to a renewable sector, catered to the reality of a renewable sector. And all the jobs, you name it. It can be from installations from heat pumps to solar PV to electric vehicle chargers and so on. The list goes on, but I'll stop for here.
Thank you, Anna, for raising these issues. Professor De Silva, let me turn to you. Strathmore University is a leading institution when it comes to renewable energy education and training in Africa. So can you tell us more? What are you doing to address some of these skills issues that have been raised by Gauri and by Anna? What are some of the innovations that you're seeing at Strathmore?
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be addressing such a wonderful gathering. The first thing I would like to say is that education is really of essence for happiness. Yeah, and in Strathmore we have 7,000 undergrad students, and one thing that we are doing is to help them by greening their minds. The curriculum authority of Kenya hasn't yet asked us to mainstream P for planet, but we have mainstreamed it anyway. So people in there, they are learning how to do, for instance, design, installation, and maintenance of solar systems. And we have the curriculum approved by the authority. It's sent it to the government, it's gazetted. Once it is approved, then we get the trainers who train these people. After finishing the training, we arrange that they see the regulator and they get a license. And they go around designing, installing, and maintaining systems. So this is very important. The idea here is don't talk too much, act, and then the learners learn by seeing it. Yeah, one other example we have is that we are the only university, correct me if I'm wrong, in Africa which is zero carbon footprint. We have 0.6 megawatts of solar on top of our roof, 6 buildings. We produce more power than we use, therefore we registered ourselves as an independent power producer, and we are selling power to the utility in a provision called you put it into the grid and they pay you 12 cents of a dollar per a quarter. Now, this is what the students see, and this is important because then we also mainstream, we teach them this thing. Some of them become very interested, and that is the way of doing things. If you preach water, drink water, yeah, and then the youngsters, they see the example and they follow. Yes.
Thank you. Learning by doing, and actually this brings me very nicely into the question I had for you, Professor Thwaites. You know, we have to think about transitioning campuses and learning institutions as well, both as a way to reduce emissions, but also as an example to educate students, as well as the wider community. So can you tell us a bit more about the work you're doing with Net Zero on campus and how this goes about promoting this kind of living lab approach?
Well, I certainly agree with Professor De Silva that students are going to learn much more by acting rather than just learning in a typical classroom situation. We have published a guide for universities, Net Zero on Campus, to help universities transition to net zero. And that's in things like renewable energy, but also transport and procurement as well, and in their buildings. We hope that by producing that guide, universities can share the knowledge that they've got in their transition to net zero. But a critical part of that is the students and the education that they get from that. And so, like Professor De Silva, Monash has a net zero plan to be net zero by 2030, which involves a very large amount of renewable energy. It involves wind and solar, but also energy efficiency and a smart grid, and we've got batteries on campus, and all of that is helping Monash get to net zero, but it's also a living lab for students to learn. One good example is the battery that we have, which is actually quite difficult to utilise. It's not as easy as you think when you put it in. And students are learning from the mistakes that we make as well as from the successes. The other part of this that's important is that it has to be a partnership. Students have to learn that if we're going to get to net zero, it's going to be a partnership between government and industry and community. And that means we need systems thinking. It's not enough to just learn out of a book, that just the techniques and the technologies. We actually have to have a systems approach that takes account of financial issues, it takes account of social issues, as well as technical. And that's the way that we'll get the transition.
That's a great point, and I think this systems thinking is so necessary, and there's quite a tendency for things to be taught in silos. So students are only getting a very narrow exposure within their own discipline, but if we're going to have the transformational change that we need, that's not what we need to happen. So thank you for raising that point. Adriana, let me turn to you. So the Bezos Earth Fund was established with the largest ever philanthropic commitment to fight climate change and protect nature. So can you share with us, what do you see as the role of philanthropy when it comes to driving and supporting education and skill building for the transition?
Thank you so much, Samah, and it's great to be here, part of the panel. Thank you, Professor Thwaites, for also raising the issue of having this systemic change perspective, and that's part of our mandate at the Bezos Earth Fund. I'm here on behalf of Nicole Iseppi. She couldn't join today because of personal circumstances, but happy to share more about the job that we are doing at the Earth Fund. And we are focused on creating transformational changes this decade. And we need to start thinking about what is the energy system of the future and how we get there. And for us, having this systemic focus, we want to address the core barriers that are not allowing us to create the system of the future. And one of those key levers is workforce development. For us, as a philanthropy, we believe that we have an important role to play here as a convener and putting all the parts of this workforce development ecosystem together. We need to focus on youth. I think youth, sometimes they don't know about what are the career pathways that they have, what are the training opportunities that they need to take advantage of, what are the jobs available. Another component is the industry as well. And the industry complains about that they are not finding qualified candidates for the positions that they need. This is a problem that we are experiencing right now in solar, in offshore wind as well. So we need to plan for the future. And then we have educational institutions that not always offer the quality training that we need, the certifications that we need as well. And one cross-cutting topic is justice. We are forgetting about getting a gender perspective, disadvantaged communities that they don't have access to training, disabled people as well, they need to be part of a workforce. So we are having different efforts, sometimes in silos as well, and we need to take advantage of our convening role as a philanthropy to connect all these efforts and take them to the next level.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And I love that you brought up this point on justice. And we always talk about the fact that we need this energy transition to be one that is just, that is inclusive, that is representative of all people, where everyone can benefit from the opportunities that are being created. And so, Gauri, let me turn to you. This is also something that IRENA calls for, a just and inclusive transition. What do you see as the role of education when it comes to driving a just transition?
So, Samah, quite clearly, when you talk about just energy transition, you're talking about not just having the very different sectors of the economy working together to move there, but you're also talking about how communities and people within the communities interface. For IRENA, it's always been very important to highlight the gender aspect in the energy transition, and we have, in fact, we do a jobs report every year that brings out how many people are employed in the renewable energy sector. But more importantly, we do a deep dive in these technologies, like we've done a deep dive in the solar and in the wind sector to look at how many women are working in these sectors. And while the numbers are are better than the oil and gas sector for solar PV, but for the wind, I think there's a lot of catching up that they need to do as far as gender goes. But it's not enough just to have more women working in the sector, but you also have to look at the quality of jobs that they are able to access with the kind of STEM education that a lot of young women are now equipped with. I think the glass ceilings that existed in the traditional oil and gas sector should not be there, because the renewables is the sunrise sector, and it's a very new thinking and a new culture that needs to be put in place so as to allow for women, for people from the vulnerable sections, and with disabilities to be able to become a part of it, because the spectrum of jobs that would be needed are so large. But at the same time, I really liked what Professor Da Silva said about learning by doing, because I think that's the most powerful way that students can see and then make their choices, because at the end of it, you might have curriculums on offer, you might have courses on offer, but you still, if students are not making these choices, it's very important to get that awareness to them so that they see this as being they are going to be in the center of this energy transition. So they have to not only know about what it's about, but to be able to think about how they can contribute to it.
And I think this is so important because sometimes we tend to focus on, young people who are already aware of these opportunities and the ones who are already ready to join the energy workforce, but then we miss this huge talent pipeline, this huge potential that is out there because we're not exposing students early enough to the opportunities that are there. So let me turn back to Professor Thwaites and Professor Da Silva. So there's clearly a lot that needs to be done to address the skills gaps and shortages, and you've shared a bit more about what both of your universities are already doing in this. But I'd just like to ask both of you what more should be done. What else should educational institutions be doing to prepare students to contribute to, but also to work in a sustainable energy future, as well as a broader green economy? So that's Professor Thwaites. Let me start with you.
Well, the first thing that I'd like to focus on is lifelong learning. We keep talking about young people, but a large part of the transition will be assisting people in middle age or later in their working careers to transition from where they've been, maybe in fossil fuels or in more traditional energy sectors, to other jobs, maybe in renewables, or it might be in other jobs. So I think lifelong learning and executive education is a key thing that we need to look at. A second thing, I think that universities particularly need to look at themselves in their local community, their precinct. At Monash, we not only have a net zero objective, we also are working on a net zero for the whole precinct with the businesses and communities around Monash. And that is a real opportunity for universities to make a difference, not just to their own students, but to the broader community in the transition. So they're two examples I give.
And those are two really great examples, thank you. Professor Da Silva, what more can you add to this? What else should we be doing?
Okay, also two ideas.
Fantastic.
The first one is that the issue I mentioned, that you help people to be able to do things. It is very important, because in this planet there is a group of people called NATO that is no action, talk only. So they talk, and they don't act, and people get tired with it. So 1 gram of action is more worthy than a ton of talking. In fact, they don't pay tax for talking, because, so that was the first thing, that we get this student of ours going out there and putting a solar system for their grandmother, you see, which is marvelous. So, like Muhammad Yunus, we train them, they change the life of the people outside the gates of that university. So this is very important. It's point number one. Point number two is that if you want to give them quality education, you have to have labs, you have to have facilities which are suitable, enable environment. Where do you get that money? You know, all the universities in Africa are a bit financially challenged, isn't it? But there are two things. One, you go to the industry, LIWA, linking industry with academia. Tell them, I'm training people for you. So now what you do, let my kids come here and learn from your nice modern installations. And this help, it becomes a win-win. People come back to the university, sit with us when we are upgrading the curriculum like that. So this is one thing. And then the second thing is, where do I find money to design a master's in sustainable energy transition or a PhD? It is not difficult. We can go to European Union, Horizons, or UK PAC in the UK, and if you put a proper proposal, they give you money, and then you do the things. This is what we did. So I keep doing a bit of publicity, offering my master's in sustainable energy transition and the PhD from next year. Thank you.
That's very good publicity. Thank you. And I mean, I think it's great to know that even though there are challenges, there are solutions. So we just have to be proactive in terms of finding a way around some of these issues. So thank you for raising that. Anna, let me turn to you now. So we've talked quite a bit about building the skills of young people, building the skills of the future energy professionals that are going to be joining the workforce. But of course, we also need to focus on reskilling and upskilling the people who are currently in the workforce. Are there any good practices you can share, or what do you think is needed in terms of reskilling and upskilling?
Yeah, I think this is important to add on, because it illustrates a sort of new way of trying to make this transition happen, right? We're going from one type of or a sector that's organized in one way to another. So this implies a transition. And not just that, it implies actually what I think are three types of collaboration that we should organize skills around, and we're going to need a lot of talent going into that. The first one is public-private collaboration, because this is something that gets done together. We were mentioning this earlier. We are at COP. I can't think of a better example. There's 100,000 delegates right now between governments, civil society, private sector, international organizations, academia. This is a big world, a lot of actors, and they all have a role to play. So reaching across the aisle, being able to take government targets and then turn them into reality, that requires that type of collaboration. That's one. The second is cross-sectoral collaboration, because as we're moving from one state of the energy system, if you will, to another, we're going to see the blurring of lines between some elements, between some cross sectors, between transport, electrification and power, with digitalization, with electrification, with decentralization. We're going to really be seeing some of these really hard lines that we saw before become a bit more blurry. And that means that there's more transversal skills and abilities that can go from one to another, and it's going to really be an asset when talents actually show that they're able to adapt to this. It means that there are existing jobs that can transfer into other. That's where reskilling and upskilling comes in, because when you think about it, the energy sector can connect with a whole other range of sectors. So the clean energy sector, renewables, for example, connects with the existing jobs in oil and gas, for example. These are skills that we will need to use, continue to use. It connects with rail, it connects with aviation, all other types of hard infrastructure that really have a lot of commonalities within that. So we need to see the value within that. It brings a continuous focus on STEM, it does. But I just want to illustrate this cross-sectoral path. And the third is what I find very interesting, is you see a lot more of different types of talent necessary. Because when I got into renewables, I was very fascinated by the story, but to me it seemed something that was, for you if you were an engineer or if you were in business development. But, I'm here talking to you about this, and there's a whole other types of roles that are required to push this forward. And I think even our very panel shows the diversity here. it's going to take a village. It's going to take a lot of different talents. And the more we realize that, the more we can plan for this. And to give a couple of examples, the way that industry is seeing this, there's, for example, in our industry association, some of our members, some of the companies that we work with, they are starting to reach out proactively as developers to academia, for example, and setting up joint programs, or at least taking part in certain sections of that to illustrate what is a reality check, how does it actually happen, how do you put up a wind turbine, what does project finance look like, what does project development look like, what does the whole sort of storytelling around it look like, branding, marketing, all these elements. And to have a closer connection with that on academia is something that our members tend to do a lot in that space. So I'm hoping to see a lot more collaboration between academia and developers, so that we can make talents that are future-proof.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think that's such an important point, and something we try to emphasize to young people that we work with is it's not just for the scientists, it's not just for the engineers. No matter what your skill set is, no matter what your passion is, there is a place for you in the energy sector. And Adriana, actually that brings me to you. So we focused quite a bit on the workforce aspect of education and skill building. But of course we know that energy education is more than just about preparing people for work. It's more than just about jobs. What are your thoughts on what we should be doing to ensure that everyone across society has the knowledge they need to contribute to and demand the change that we need to see in our energy system?
Absolutely. And I think the perspective that we traditionally have of the clean energy transition is focused more on economic component and how we can make renewables accessible, which is very much needed, but we forget about the human component and people that should be at the center of the energy transition. And it's not only, as you said, to develop the skills needed, but what is the benefit for these people and the whole community, and make their livelihoods better. And there are different ways of doing that, and we need to be focusing on workforce as a multi-issue perspective, and how we can connect renewables with agriculture, with health sectors, and what are the kinds of skills. As Anna was saying, this is not only about technical engineering people that we need here, we need project management, we need lawyers, we need marketing. So we need to start thinking that we not only need to tap into the energy workforce, but we compete with other sectors, for instance, technology as well. And why the renewable jobs are not as attractive as other ones. And I think Gauri also mentioned that we need to focus on the quality of these jobs. What are the benefits that people are getting, the social benefits, for instance. And one of the things that we are doing at the Earth Fund, and this year we're very proud of being the headline sponsor of the Student Energy Summit that happened on the sidelines of COP. And we were trying to connect youth with jobs and industry leaders so they can open their minds and identify all the variety of career options that they have, and connect with peers as well. It's not only about learning from industry leaders, but also learning from other entrepreneurs. I was surprised that so many young people, they were developing their own projects, and they are very much motivated to create impact. And sometimes we talk about that youth are the solution to all the problems, that we are not the ones giving them the opportunities and supporting them as well. So I think we need to move from only thinking about we need skills and training, but what are other benefits that we can share with these communities and people.
Fantastic. Again, some great points. And I mean, I think young people have so much to bring to the table, and we have to move away from this idea that they're just, empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge, but they also have their own experience, their own innovations that they can bring to the table as well. So thank you for that, Adriana. So I have a question for all of the panelists this time. So it's clear that a lot needs to be done, and we really need to put in place targeted policies, targeted measures to address some of the skilling gaps and needs that we're seeing. So my question to each of you, if you had to make one policy recommendation, what would be your top policy recommendation for accelerating education and skill building for the energy transition? Perhaps Professor De Silva, I will start with you.
All right. Yeah. I actually have a very clear idea that if I were to say something that you should take home and should become like a brain tattoo and stay there, is get involved, do something. Like now we are coming closer to Christmas. Many people in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania and in Africa, they have relatives, grandmother, aunties in the villages using paraffin for lighting. So don't give her paraffin for lighting. Give her a micro pico system, isn't it? A solar panel, a lantern, a USB port for charging the mobile phone. And that will make a difference. And that will make you from an observer to an actor. And this is what all of us should do.
Fantastic. I love this. An observer to an actor. I'm going to write that one down. Thank you. Gauri, please.
Samah, you know, when you look at how the energy transition will pan out in different countries, there will be very different pathways. But what's also important is to understand that, you know, in the global world that we are living in, there is a lot of mobility. There's a mobility of people, and you will expect people to want to move for better opportunities across the various geographies. And for that to happen, it's important to get the skills and occupational standards in place, because that then allows you know, the skilled personnel and people to actually take advantage of the opportunities that energy transition will throw up across the world. And unless we facilitate this kind of mobility of people between regions, we will otherwise find huge shortage happening in one geography, and you know, many people that are ready to take on that job not being able to do it. And I'll give you a quick example. I was in Munich, where the German Solar Council actually said that as of today, we need 10,000 skilled people to be able to install the solar panels on rooftops, and we don't have them. So, but you know, it's not by saying we don't have them that suddenly they will appear from somewhere, but you need that kind of a certification, or, you know, certificates or standards that allow this to happen.
Fantastic. Another great policy recommendation. So standards and certifications. Anna, what would be your top policy recommendation?
At the risk of sounding too obvious on my part as the Global Renewables Alliance, I would urge countries to pledge to triple renewables, because that signal makes then markets and private sector organize. Private sector will thinks that it will organize for itself. It will have to start looking for those people. It will have to get involved with academia. It will be forced. It will literally be looking to be proactive about this themselves, so that they can help create that job force that they already need. So this is already set in motion, but if that signal comes very clearly, and then we work with governments on all the bottlenecks that still exist to make that happen, it will materialize.
Okay, fantastic. So setting targets, setting a clear policy signal to state actors, I think that's really important. Professor Thwaites, what would be your top recommendation?
I'd like to build on Andrea's point about empowering young people to have more power in climate policy. And young people and students are more ambitious for action than older people, and yet we largely do, as you said, Samah, which is talk down to them and treat them as empty vessels. So I would like to engage them and give them more of a say in actual climate planning. And Professor De Silva loves acronyms. NATO, you know, no action, talk only. Well, given Professor De Silva is from Brazil, I'll use BRICS. build renewables in collaboration with students.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a nice one.
Very nice.
Very nice acronym. Thank you. Adriana, what would be your top
I
recommendation?
don't have an acronym, but very difficult to come with a silver bullet when there are no silver bullets here. But I think we need to have a workforce task force in the government, and not from a traditional approach where all the policies, you have the Ministry of Jobs on one side, you have Ministry of Education, Energy, Environment, and they don't talk to each other, but we need a collaborative effort. And I want to mention the job of Mariana Mazzucato and how she developed this mission economy concept. And we need to have a mission for workforce development as well, creating this more collaborative approach where you involve all the right stakeholders, not in a silo, but talking to each other and coming with some more transformational idea. And this is also part of our Earth Fund mandate, how we can create this transformational change, having different approaches and coming beyond the traditional silos that operate in the governments.
Wonderful, another great point. And I mean, I think these silos are happening a lot. I mean, even here at COP this last week, I've been quite engaged in the education discussions, and you go to the education rooms, you'll find the people coming from ministries of education, educators, teachers. There are no energy people in those rooms. And then we'll go to the energy rooms and you'll hear all of the energy people saying we need to build the skills, we need to build that workforce. There are no educators there who are part of the conversation. So there is clearly a disconnect happening somewhere. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. So I see on the clock we have 1 minute left, so we will have to close this session. Let me first of all thank all of the panelists for all of the great insights that you have shared. And all of this will really help us shape our agenda on education and skill building over the course of the next year. I'd also like to thank you all, the audience, for taking your time to join us here for this conversation. And finally, thank you to Debate Cares for giving us the space to have discussions like this one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.